I do want to ask you about this. One of the biggest opportunities for investors looking for companies with high growth potential right now is obviously the emergence of generative AI. There's a lot of hype around it, a lot of confusion perhaps about it, particularly for non-technical people. But there's also no doubt, I think, that it has the potential to radically change the way we do things in a digital environment. As a tool of digitization, it's incredible, right? So in that context, in the context of what we've already talked about, where do you think the most interesting and lucrative use cases are for generative AI? And that obviously that's going to feed into the, what sort of startups are going to come through the system that have something really amazing to offer using it, and what that means for investors looking for companies that are doing that kind of work and have that kind of growth potential. Connie, do you want to lead us off on this one?
Sure. Do you remember when I said when there's areas that I want to understand more, I reach out to people that I respect? One of those people in my community is Rodney Forrest, and he runs this business called Sublime's Funds Management. And I said to him, a bit like Sean, my biggest disaster to date has been an AI investment, which I had to write down to zero, on, in a school, on being able to detect mental health amongst the students, and basically couldn't ultimately get the next round of capital off, etc. But he's been very useful in helping me get my head around the difference in traditional and generative AI, and then the opportunities, which has really shifted my thinking substantially. And that even understanding that traditional is the analysis of data and the ability to perform certain tasks, whereas generative, for those, it creates entirely new content. But what we're seeing is this massive shift now between the traditional. I used to think, oh, it's much about process and whatever. Actually, a lot of it is about hardware. And the move now from CPU and being able now to basically upgrade to GPU or graphic processing units. And what you're seeing is, call it the next generation of, kind of Intel's in a hardware environment. And it's been very interesting to see the valuations, come through, and the effect that it's actually having on content creation. And, one of my concerns is that these really, the winners and losers, it'll take probably 3 to 5 years to really see who they are. And after you're seeing some of the valuations come out of the US, which is, enormous on the GPU, the provision of GPU. But one of the things I'm concerned about personally is when you actually move to AI solutions, it's very hard. Everybody's putting AI in front of their names, whether it's real AI or not, to try and get higher valuations. And unless you have a lot of time to really delve into it, I'm personally going to wait for a little while longer after my last experience to see where people are starting to have probably greater volume and a real business model, rather than just investing in AI, to not miss the AI trend, which is what I did before in a limited way. But I can just see it, it manifests across education, it manifests itself in health tech, it's manifesting itself in operational resilience and content. Where's the really big winner going to be, and where are the acquisitions going to come from? Because at the moment, except for the hardware side, you just have a whole bunch of segregated AI plays without any real clarity from my perspective on the real winners and losers.
Yeah, Sean, I know you've looked into this, and what do you think are the interesting and lucrative use cases for this?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I love Connie's view. I mean, I guess I look at Connie's right. Everything has .ai after it, and it used to be SaaS businesses. Everything became a SaaS business now. Everything's an AI business, which of course it's not. As you know, I spent a bit of time at MIT last year, on AI, and we'll do so again this year, because the topic is, as Connie said, it's moving just so quickly, and you really do have to differentiate between, Connie used the phrase like traditional or responsive AI techniques, which are large language models or robotics, which are already in existence, have been in existence for quite some years. And, any business that isn't using them, you sort of got to ask, like, why that's not the case, really. Versus generative, which is this predictive thing. So here's the thing, I don't think I'll find myself, and I'm not looking to invest into AI businesses versus invest into industries and businesses which can be really significantly positively impacted by AI techniques. The responsive ones already sort of are in so many industries. Let's pick health, because I've spoken a little about health during the course of this hour. You already in health have a whole bunch of, for example, robotics techniques, where you'll see surgeons use high definition robotics to actually dramatically improve the service that they offer. You'll see other aspects of large language models used in health to enable clinicians and others to provide their services. What's really interesting is when you get to generative AI, which, as Connie put it, is a predictive type of AI. That profession is, the professions generally are not ready yet to allow for the use of generative AI, predictive AI, because that profession wants to regulate what actually is seen to be a problem or not, truly. And that's, of course, there's a smile that could be self-interest, but there's actually a genuine smile. Will this come up with the best sort of outcomes or not? And it's interesting. My son, as you know, Steve, actually works in a startup environment in health tech, and there are sort of significant blood diagnostics in the US that will take DNA and then use predictive analytics to determine whether you have cancer, as an example of what is essentially generative AI. It's piecing together to look at what your future might be. But they're pretty nascent, and they're new, and they're not actually backed particularly by the medical profession. So that's where the medical profession is. If you look at financial services, large language models and or other reactive data has been used in many different environments. So, for example, in funds management, it's been used for as long as we can think about. I think Ray Dalio probably invented it or started it. Like, what is the future for different stocks, etc.? How do you map that out? But when it comes to using generative AI, for example, on robo-advisors, that's not been a successful model yet anywhere in the world, despite some really significant capital having gone into it. So here's the thing. If you look at, let me call them mission critical type industries like health or like financial services, to Connie's point, I don't think generative AI is at the point yet where it's investable. And amongst the reasons, by the way, is generative AI doesn't explain yet how it's got to its answer. It just gives you an answer. And no professional is going to go, I therefore think that's a great thing. I don't know how you got to that answer, but it's a professional's not going to do that. So I think generative AI has some way to go in those mission critical industries, as opposed to, for example, some services industries where they provide a service. The generative AI can give them options and certainly shortcut some of their work, but give them options. But the human then gets to oversight that before it goes to the customer. I think generative AI in the creative industry, the brands industry, media industry, in some parts of industries which involve modeling and then explanatory outcomes, such as architecture, I can see generative AI actually very positively affecting those type of industries, but it is a way to go in significant regulated mission critical industries, I think. So that's sort of where I'm looking at it. And as I said earlier, if I don't trust the sales cycle and the customer cycle, I'm out at this point. And the impact of generative AI on mission critical industries, still too unproven for me.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I think one of the comments that has really sat with me is this idea that AI in and of itself is not the investable piece. Rather, how is it inside industry and workflow where AI can be integrated as part of the tech solution that then makes things a little bit more efficient? That's super interesting to me. Even if I look at the way we run our business, the process of an investor going from deal awareness through to KYC, AML, due diligence, making a transaction, managing their portfolio on the one hand, and then the founder in the venture capital side, preparing their capital raising narrative, preparing their capital strategy, building a capital raising campaign, and then reaching all of the relevant people all the way through to financial close. In amongst that, both of those workflows, those sort of twin side of the marketplace workflows, there is an opportunity to embed artificial intelligence. And when I think about the way we train team members to do that manual work and the way perhaps corporate finance and venture capital firms might do that across the country and around the world, they're basically using years of experience and campaign experience and data to do pieces of that puzzle. But now we can build a large language model that has all of our data and all of our campaign experience, good and bad, to do exactly the same thing. Not the whole thing, but aspects of it, which make the entire thing much more efficient. I think that's super interesting. But again, that's
and also the fact that most of the data now is a central repository in AWS, and AWS and Salesforce make the largest investment, at least in being able to get raw data out and putting it into that environment and looking at what can be done in terms of communication, etc. And, even on the hardware side, even though I wouldn't invest in an AI type business, one of the things I've delved and will delve in even more is things like NVIDIA is worth 10 times what Intel is now, because they sell the GPU for $40,000 versus a CPU for $1,000 a unit, and they're booked out for the next 2 to 3 years. That's how Rodney has shifted my thinking, not in the service itself, but what the underlying hardware and technology is that will support the scalability of it. And one of the exciting things for VentureCrowd is really being able to get that data and understand, back to Sean's point, that customer information. And the nice thing about the generative AI is its anonymity. You can get really deep information on an anonymous level, whereas previously, you were breaching privacy laws.
Yeah, agreed.